I'm Sarah Peacock, and this is my response to the Unity and Diversity video that we watched. Something that they talked about quite a bit in the video, especially in the beginning, was the theory of multiple intelligences. And essentially, this just addresses the different ways that students learn. So you have different learning types like visual, kinesthetic, auditory, so on and so forth. And as a teacher, it's your job to take those different learning types into consideration because you want to meet all the different learning needs of your students. And if you do this, you're ensuring that they learn the information the best way possible, and you're making your students feel included. But in the same breath, whenever you're incorporating different teaching methods into your lesson to meet these different learning types, you want to make sure that what you incorporate is meaningful. So, for example, if you're planning out a lesson and you realize that the whole thing is visual, there's no other types of learning in there, and you just randomly go through and pick music. Well, if music doesn't fit into your lesson and make sense, if you can't include music in some way that is logical, then it's not meaningful. You don't need to include different learning types just to include them. If you don't have a student that learns through music, then don't include it into your lessons. You want to make sure that you choose one that makes sense and that will actually help your students. Something that one of the teachers said in the video that really stuck with me was all learning counts. So it doesn't matter what learning type you are, how you learn, what you need in order to learn, because it all matters. It all matters. As long as you're trying to learn, it counts. It matters. So another thing that they said was some students don't verbalize their thoughts and opinions, and this could be because they have the mindset that, oh, well, what I think doesn't matter. My opinion doesn't matter. And that's something that students don't need to think. We as teachers need to make sure that our classroom is, well, we need to make sure that we have an environment that is nice for your students and that they feel safe and comfortable with you, comfortable enough to express their opinions and not have that mindset that, oh, well, what I think doesn't matter. And a way that they did this in the video at the closer to the end, when they did the citizenship activity and they had all the different requirements posted at different spots around the room, and they were told to go stand by which requirement they thought was the most important. So by having your students stand beside what opinion they have or what they think is most important, that is them expressing their opinion without doing it verbally. So that's you acknowledging all of the opinions, so that can help to break their mindset of my opinion doesn't matter. Something that just kept coming back to me the whole time I watched the video was you need to pay attention to your students. So, like I said earlier, everybody's different. Everyone has different needs. Everyone comes from a different background, a different culture. There are different races, and you have different types of learners. And you need to acknowledge those. You need to pay attention to your students in order to realize those differences, because you do need to acknowledge those differences. One way you can do that is to diversify your curriculum. So one of the teachers said that she diversified her literature that she used in her classroom to make sure that all of the students were being represented, that they saw people like themselves in what they were reading. And without acknowledging diversity, you can't really have unity. So an example of that would be one of the teachers in one of the clips that they showed taught at a predominantly Native American school, and he wanted his students to acknowledge that they were different and that it was okay that they were different. But he also wanted them to know that they do have similarities with people in the outside world. So by letting them know that they were different and acknowledging that they were different, he was acknowledging their diversity. But by letting them know that they had similarities with people in the outside world, that was creating a sense of unity and letting them know that, yes, you're different, but that's okay. And that helped to create that sense of unity. And he furthered that sense of unity and diversity by, in the classroom, he would speak English, and there would be a translator there that spoke the students' native language. And he would ask the translator to explain it to them in their native language, and she would. And then afterwards, he would say, okay, well, now can you, the students, explain it to me in English? So that was making them feel important, making them not feel different or lesser than because they didn't only speak English. He was acknowledging their differences. There was also another teacher in a clip that his students spoke Spanish and English. They moved back and forth between both languages, and he also moved back and forth between both languages. And this just, again, like the other teacher, it validates, well, it recognizes their differences and makes them feel validated and not lesser than because they are different. Another statement that was really powerful to me is one of the teachers said that school is our chance to talk about stereotypes, discrimination, and racism. She said that it's pretty difficult to get a bunch of grown-ups in the same room and talk about these difficult topics, about stereotypes not being okay and discrimination not being okay, and how it's not okay to dislike someone because of the color of their skin. So we really want to cover these topics with our students in our classroom. That way, whenever they become older, they won't fall victim to these stereotypes and won't discriminate against people for things that don't really matter. So it's important that we talk about that with our students and pay attention to them if they are falling victim to those stereotypes. We want to instill it in them at an early age that stereotyping someone is not okay. So something that I saw with this citizenship activity, I made a connection. It paralleled with diversity and unity. So what I mean by that is, in the activity, they talked about all different kinds of requirements that you had to meet in order to become a citizen of the United States. Now, while all of those requirements are different, they worked towards the same end goal, and that was becoming a citizen. And you can apply that same knowledge to your students in your classroom. So essentially, each student is different, but at the end of the day, we're all working together towards the same goal. At the end of the day, we're all human beings. So yes, we're different, but we want the same thing. And that'll help. If you apply that logic in your classroom, then that'll help to create a sense of unity in your classroom and a safe space. So why is all of this important to me? I want to make sure that all of my students feel included. And I can do that by, just like the teachers in my examples that I gave, if I acknowledge that my students are different and talk about their differences and make them realize that it's okay that they're different, first of all, that'll make them feel validated. And then next, I would need to ensure that despite them being different from one another, we're all the same. We're all in the same classroom. We all want the same thing. And another reason I want them to acknowledge differences and me to acknowledge their differences is I want them to learn about how people are different. I want them to learn, well, why do they look different than me? Why is it important that they speak a different language? Why is it okay that they speak a different language? I don't want students to say, oh, well, you don't speak English, so I don't like you. Little kids can have that mindset, and I want to make sure that my students never have a mindset like that. I want them to appreciate different cultures and different backgrounds and different beliefs. I want them to just realize that it's okay to be different and not to judge someone because they're different. I also want to make sure that all of their needs are met. So like we said with the different learning types, I want to know about the different learning types and include different teaching methods in my lessons to make sure that none of my students are left behind. I don't want anybody to feel left out or like they don't understand because of something that I'm doing. So I want to acknowledge their different learning needs in the classroom to make sure that everyone has an even playing field. So how do the speaker's reflections relate to culturally responsive teaching? A really great example that one of the teachers gave that stuck with me and that I just think is wonderful is the teacher that talked about the activity that she did with the leaves. She had students bring in a couple different leaves and she would ask them, well, how are they different? And they would make a list of how each leaf was different. And then she would ask, well, how are they alike? And the list of similarities was way longer than the list of differences. They eventually came to the conclusion that differences are what we can see on the outside. They're just physical. And similarities are what's on the inside or our life experiences. And I think it's important for students to realize that deep down, we're all alike. So like I said before, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We may have different hair color or skin color, or we may sound different or speak different, but inside, we're all the same. And if you teach that to your students, then that'll create that sense of unity that you need in your classroom. Another teacher gave the example of she told her students to find someone like you. And at the beginning, the similarities, the reasons of being alike were more physical. So they would find someone with the same color shirt or the same hair color. And the more and more they did it, the deeper those similarities got. So they might find someone and say, oh, well, we both have 3 brothers. Or, oh, well, we both like country music. Or pizza is our favorite food. So the deeper they got with those connections would make them realize, oh, well, we're more alike than we think we are. And that will also help to create that sense of unity. Another example of the culturally responsive teaching are the 2 teachers that I mentioned earlier. The one that would say, well, can you say it back to me in English? And the teacher that went back and forth between English and Spanish. Those 2 teachers were acknowledging the differences between their students and themselves. They were acknowledging the diversity that they had in their classroom. They were embracing it and making all the students feel included. So essentially at the end of the day, what you want to do, like I said before, you want to acknowledge that you do have diversity in your classroom. You want to acknowledge those differences because if you don't acknowledge those differences, you won't be able to create the sense of unity that you want in your classroom.